Welcome to the Dark Ozarks. We are diving into dark forests and magical trees, specifically what dark things lurk in the Mark Twain National Forest that spans 1.5 million acres in southern Missouri and northern Arkansas. We will get back to all the scary things in the Mark Twain Forest in a minute, but first we want to remind you that the Dark Ozarks podcast is now available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, or just about any other podcast platform. So what happens in the Mark Twain Forest that scares you?
Well, besides people who disappear and are never heard from again, there are the UFO encounters, Bigfoot, werewolves, and the Missouri Mystery Mound.
And let's not forget an entire colony disappeared as well. And the Trail of Tears went through what is now Mark Twain National Forest.
There have been a lot of things happen there that was very dark, and some of it, of course, is hard to explain, and it's up to everyone to decide what really happened. And then there's the issue of witchcraft and magic and the magic of the forest itself.
We will discuss what you thought was just a relaxing hike or camping trip in a second. But first, we want to invite everyone to like, follow, etc. Dark Ozarks on Facebook, Instagram, as well as here on YouTube. Plus, we encourage you to follow the podcast. While you're over on Facebook, you can subscribe to the private Dark Ozarks subscribers group. Why, you may ask? Yes, it does have a small subscription fee, but you receive exclusive content and behind-the-scenes info that you don't get anywhere else. It also helps us bring more original content to Dark Ozarks. You can click the subscribe button on the page. You will have to log in since there's a payment, and we do appreciate everyone.
And now you can also get Dark Ozarks t-shirts for sale at darkozarks.com and paranormalsciencelab.com.
All of your reading needs, including a large section on the paranormal, history, and more, not to mention the building's haunted. Tell Bob and Elise that we sent you.
We also want to thank Beard Engine Brewing Company in Alva, Missouri. Beard Engine Brewing is the only English-style brewery in Missouri and twice named Missouri's best brewery by the Missouri Brewers Association. Great beer and great food in a historical building with a noir past. And yes, that building is also haunted. Tell Nate and Tiff that we sent you.
Okay, of all the things that happen in the Mark Twain National Forest, something that may surprise people are werewolves and hellhounds.
Well, it surprised me, and the reports are anecdotal, but they are existent, and that at the same time, when you cross tie it a little bit, we do have some modern reports of quote unquote hellhounds, but we have a legacy of omens dating back to the Civil War that are not dissimilar to some, at least, if not more than just some, of the Anglo-Saxon and Celtic and Norse lore about this potential phenomena.
Very true. And actually, one story that actually came to us through Dark Ozarks a few months ago involved what potentially could be one of these hellhounds / werewolves, and it was up in the Rolla area, not exactly Rolla, but that general area, and was on a highway in the forest. And the lady described driving along. She was driving to work in the morning. She said it was about 8 or 8:30 in the morning, and it was clear, sunny. You could see well. And she saw this dog beside the road, or what she thought was a dog. It was huge, she said. And as she drove past, and she's going highway speed, it was a 2-lane highway, but she's still going 55, 60 miles an hour. The dog started chasing the car, and then she realized it was keeping up in speed. And this went on for a couple of miles. And she said it it was larger than anything that she'd seen. It was more the size of a bear, but looked more canine, and that it kept turning its head as it was pacing the car, looking at her as if it was actually looking at her. And certainly it unsettled her. And then after a couple of miles, it just stopped and she drove on.
Yes. That is now, first of all, that's terrifying. Second of all, I'm very excited about that report because that came anecdotally to Dark Ozarks.
Yes. Yes.
And so if you're like me and you binge listen to stuff like this, which I do, one of the things that you'll notice oftentimes is that there might be an injection into the interwebs of one story or one, and it's at times difficult to tell source
Or how creative someone's been. Are they writing fan fiction basically?
Yes, and often that singular injection of content will then get duplicated and triplicated over and over. It will expand out, but there are not. But again, it is difficult to track down an original source, and sometimes it's difficult to track down the original location. And I think that's something we're going to really focus on tonight's episodes, because for people, and interestingly enough, a number of phenomena associated with Mark Twain National Forest is online. But if you're listening to this here on YouTube, the anecdotal story that we just shared has not been online. This is original, and it is sourced.
Yes. And so those are always exciting, and it really came as I don't really know what I saw, but this is what I saw.
Yeah.
And so she did not come at it as, oh, I saw a werewolf. Oh, I saw a hellhound. It was, this is what I saw, but it didn't make sense for it to be a dog.
Yes. And I'm going to, there's a couple of things that I think are important. I'll be covering this on both episodes, but it was something that I found very apparent listening to some of the other things that are online about the Mark Twain National Forest in Missouri. For individuals who have not been on the ground in Missouri, done the research, or simply interacted with the Mark Twain National Forest, it would be easy if you're elsewhere, far, far away from Missouri, to assume that Mark Twain National Forest functions perhaps like Yellowstone or the Tetons or Yosemite.
That's true. It does not.
No, the idea that there's one big chunk with everything on the inside is national forest and everything on the outside is private land or government land or whatever land, not national forest. And in the Ozarks, in the Missouri Ozarks, south of I-70, which is the primary interstate corridor between Kansas City and St. Louis, there are 9 gigantic swaths of land set aside as the Mark Twain National Forest. And those include Cedar Creek, Houston Rolla, Willow Springs, Ava, Cassville, Salem Potosi, Fredericktown, Poplar Bluff, and the Doniphan 11 Point regions. And within the Mark Twain National Forest, there are regular highways, there are forest roads, there are smaller roads, and there's, while each of these regions are sparsely populated, there are people living still on private property interspersed throughout the sections.
There we go.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh.
It glitched.
Yeah, that's
Wait.
number 2 tonight.
Yeah. We where it seemed to cut out was that there are people living in these areas that, you know, you
Yes.
don't go to Yellowstone and pass by private homes. But that happens. You can drive along a road and you're going to pass in and out of Mark Twain National Forest sometimes.
Yes.
And sometimes if you're not familiar with the area, you may not realize when you've entered the forest when you've left too.
Yes. Very, very true. And you know, in my location, I interact with the Ava section on a regular basis. Going up Highway H, going up 125, over by Chadwick, north of Forsyth, this entire region. And it is, again, each one of these sections is absolutely massive and is mostly forest. It's not, it's not completely, you know, not like Yellowstone, but it is mostly forest. And the takeaway on all of this for tonight's discussion is that these are, first of all, massive amounts of land. Second of all, they are extremely rural. While there are people living throughout the regions, the region sections, it is very, very rural. Population in most of these areas are very low. Population density is really, really low. And it creates an interesting mix because you have everyday people who live in the region interacting with the forest in ways that are very, very dissimilar to the way that the region, you know, the Wyoming folks might interact with Yellowstone, or California folks might interact with Yosemite. It's a very different structure here in the Ozarks, as oftentimes things are very different here in the Ozarks.
True. And I guess we should note too, there are parts of Mark Twain National Forest that are actually northern Arkansas as well.
Yes. And so just working through that process, I think, is really, really interesting. Pardon me. Weather change. But the overarching realities is that you do have the opportunity for everyday people, not tourists, to be interacting with unique phenomena that is associated with essentially the dark forest.
That's true. And I think that is one reason there may be so many tales in Mark Twain National Forest, is that you aren't just dealing with tourists who are coming in there for a day or two.
No, no, you're not. And you're dealing with, in many cases, individuals who are accustomed to this kind of land. They're farmers, they're ranchers, they're people who are accustomed to living in a rural environment. And I think that's very positive. Now, as a leverage off of this information, again, we're dealing with 9 disparate giant sections of land just in the state of Missouri. And so if you're like us and you live here, when you hear a report that says it was in the Mark Twain National Forest, I'm like, great. That doesn't narrow it down. That technically narrows it down to the bottom half of the state of Missouri.
Yeah, or someplace in northern Arkansas, depending.
Yeah, and so there's just that. The importance is one of the things that it's certainly the contact that you mentioned, who contacted us through Rolla, through Dark Ozarks, is in the Rolla area. That helps. That helps enormously. Still a gigantic swath of land, but really, really brings that down. And so a little bit of geographical education on this, in the sense that in doing research and finding these stories and tying things down, there's a lot of different points that we're looking at. And of course, regional lore etc., all play a huge role in terms of possibly determining what something might be, as well as just the aspects of things like conjurings, things like ley lines, lots and lots of factors that have to go into this. So there's a lot here.
There really is. So you all may want to check back in tomorrow night for the extended video that will delve into a lot of more topics and a lot more information. And we appreciate you all, and we will be back here next week.
Absolutely.
Don't forget to check out upcoming events and merchandise at darkozarks.com and paranormalsciencelab.com. Thank you again to Always Buying Books and Beard Engine Brewing Company for helping bring the Dark Ozarks to everyone.
And on our next episode, we're going to be discussing Dark Tales from the Queen City of the Ozarks, Springfield, Missouri. Catch the Dark Ozarks podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and other podcast platforms. Thank you to everyone. And remember, there are no easy answers in the dark.